They bound me to an alien officer. I did know how dangerous she was. Deathworld legends, the first contact between humanity and the Galactic Coalition was not announced with hope or celebration. It came with chains. From the moment the human transport docked at Coalition Station Vierx, the humans were treated like a problem that needed to be managed. Their homeworld, Earth, was labeled a Class 5 death world. Unstable gravity, violent weather, aggressive wildlife. A species that survived there could only be reckless or primitive. That was the general belief. The Coalition's solution was control. The human was brought forward in restraints, his hands bound behind his back with glowing energy cuffs. His name was Elias Ward, a former security officer from Earth's orbital forces. He had volunteered for this mission, believing cooperation would protect his planet. Now he stood in a massive chamber filled with towering aliens of many species, all watching him like a curiosity. At the center of the chamber stood Commander Valeryx. She was taller than any human present, her armored form sharp and elegant at the same time. Her species, the Carvel, were known across the galaxy as disciplined warriors and elite officers. Her eyes were cold, unreadable, and fixed on the human before her. She did not see a person, she saw an assignment. The binding ceremony began without ceremony. A Coalition official announced that, as part of a cultural integration experiment, the human would be bound by neural and contractual link to Commander Valeryx. He would serve as her attached asset. His movements, proximity, and compliance would be enforced by the bond. Disobedience would result in pain, unconsciousness, or worse. Elias listened silently. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He had been trained to endure worse than humiliation. Valeryx stepped forward when instructed. She activated the binding device, a thin metallic ring that unfolded into threads of light. They wrapped around Elias' neck and wrist, burning cold as they settled into place. For a brief second, both of them felt it. A connection. Valeryx frowned slightly. The bond was meant to transmit basic commands and compliance feedback. Instead, she sensed something else. Pressure, tension. A restrained force that did not feel fragile. She dismissed the thought. The official declared the binding complete. Elias was no longer an independent human representative. He was now attached to Commander Valeryx, legally and biologically restricted. Around them, alien observers whispered. Some laughed softly, others looked curious. A few looked uneasy. Elias was released from the transport guards and stood beside Valeryx, still bound, still silent. She looked down at him, noting his scars, his rigid posture, the way his eyes moved constantly, scanning exits and threats. "You will follow," she said in clear, clipped Coalition standard. "Yes, Commander," Elias replied. His voice was calm, too calm. As they walked through the station corridors, Valeryx reviewed his file in her mind. Human, male, physically durable for his size. Emotionally reactive, limited technological background, high adaptability rating, which she assumed meant unpredictability. She did not plan to rely on him. Their assigned vessel, the CS Vigilance of Dawn, was preparing for departure. It was a patrol ship, recently reassigned to a sector near contested space. Valeryx had not been informed of the reason for the sudden redeployment, only that it was urgent. The crew reacted to the human with open discomfort. Some stared, others avoided eye contact. A few openly mocked him in languages they assumed he could not understand. Elias understood more than they realized. He took his assigned position near the auxiliary control deck, standing where Valeryx ordered him. The bond hummed faintly whenever he shifted too far from her. It was uncomfortable but manageable. Pain was not new to him. Valeryx addressed her officers, issuing orders with precision and authority. She did not acknowledge Elias unless necessary. To her, he was a symbol of Coalition dominance, not a soldier. As the ship entered hyperspace, alarms suddenly flared. An unknown signal had been detected near the destination point. Distress markers, multiple. The data was incomplete and scrambled. Valeryx felt irritation. This was not supposed to be a simple patrol. When the Vigilance of Dawn exited hyperspace, the reason became clear. Debris floated everywhere. Wrecked ships, both civilian and military, torn apart by weapons fire. Energy signatures still lingered. This was not an accident. It was a trap. Before Valeryx could issue a full tactical command, hostile ships emerged from behind a nearby asteroid field. Pirate vessels, fast, heavily armed. The bridge erupted into controlled chaos. Shields were raised, weapons powered up. Veilrix stood firm, issuing orders with practiced calm. Elias remained where he was told, watching silently. The first impact shook the ship violently. Consoles sparked. Crew members stumbled. Another blast followed, stronger than expected. The shields dropped to critical levels almost instantly. Veilrix's eyes narrowed. These pirates were better equipped than intelligence suggested. "Damage control teams respond," she ordered. Then the power flickered. The auxiliary systems failed. Several decks lost gravity. Screams echoed through the ship. Veilrix turned sharply. "Humans, stay where you are." "Yes, Commander," Elias said again. But when a secondary explosion rocked the deck, throwing an officer into a bulkhead, Elias moved, not away from Veilrix, toward the damage. The bond flared with warning signals, sending pain through his body. Elias gritted his teeth and pushed through it. He caught the injured officer before they hit the floor and dragged them to safety, using emergency clamps to secure them. Veilrix felt the resistance through the bond. Surprise flickered through her mind. "Return immediately," she commanded. Elias looked back at her. For a brief moment their eyes met. "I will," he said, "just fixing this first." He rerouted a damaged power conduit using a tool scavenged from the floor. Sparks burned his hands, but he did not stop. Gravity stabilized on the deck seconds later. The pirates fired again. One of their shots breached the outer hull on a lower level. Veilrix felt something new through the bond. Not panic, focus, cold, sharp awareness. Elias was already moving before she could order him. He sealed blast doors manually, his muscles straining as emergency systems lagged. He braced against decompression, locking himself in place while others escaped. He should have passed out. He didn't. When he finally returned to Veilrix's side, his breathing was heavy, his uniform scorched, blood seeping from a cut on his forehead. He stood straight anyway. "Systems are holding," he said. Veilrix stared at him. This was not what a low-threat asset looked like. The battle raged on. Coalition officers fought according to training, but the pirates adapted quickly. They exploited hesitation. They pressed every weakness. Elias watched the tactical displays and spoke quietly. "Commander," he said, choosing his words carefully, "they're hurting us." Veilrix ignored him at first. Another blast struck the ship's flank. The vigilance of dawn lurched, alarms screaming. Veilrix clenched her jaw. "Explain. They're forcing us toward that debris cluster," Elias said. "They want us boxed in." Veilrix analyzed the data again. He was right. "How do you know this?" she asked. Elias shrugged slightly. "It's how predators hunt." She did not respond, but she adjusted her orders. The ship narrowly avoided total entrapment. The pirates hesitated, surprised. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they withdrew. Silence fell over the bridge, broken only by damaged systems and labored breathing. The vigilance of dawn was battered but alive. Veilrix slowly turned toward the human bound at her side. The bond transmitted something unexpected, not submission, resolve. She studied him carefully now, not as an asset, but as a variable she had failed to account for. "You disobeyed orders," she said. "Yes, Commander," Elias replied, "but the ship survived." Around them, crew members watched in silence. Veilrix did not punish him. Instead, she turned back to the viewport, staring at the wreckage drifting in space. For the first time since the binding, doubt entered her thoughts. Perhaps the Coalition had made a mistake, not in binding the human, but in underestimating what they had bound. The vigilance of dawn drifted in silence after the pirate retreat, its hull scarred and its systems struggling to stabilize. Emergency lights cast long shadows across the bridge. Crew members moved with quiet urgency, repairing what they could and checking on the wounded. The tension did not fade. It lingered, heavy and uncomfortable. Commander Veilrix stood near the central console, her posture rigid. Her species valued control above all else, and control had nearly slipped from her grasp. She replayed the battle in her mind, analyzing every decision, every delay. One detail stood out more than any other: the human. Elias Ward stood where she had ordered him, hands loosely clenched at his sides. Blood from his head wound had dried, dark against his skin. He had refused medical attention until the deck was secure. Now he waited, silent, not defiant, not fearful. The bond between them pulsed softly. Veilrix had expected discomfort from disobedience, maybe resentment. Instead, what filtered through the link was calm readiness. It disturbed her more than panic ever could. "You will report to medical," she said finally. "Yes, Commander," Elias replied. He turned to leave, then paused. Permission to speak freely? Veilrix hesitated. The request itself was unusual. Assets did not ask, they obeyed. Granted, she said. If the pirates come back, Elias said, they won't hit us the same way. Veilrix looked at him sharply. Explain. They tested us, he said, checked how we react under pressure. Next time they'll strike harder and faster. Veilrix studied his face. He showed no arrogance, only certainty. You are assuming they will return, she said. They will, Elias replied. We survived, that makes us interesting. Veilrix dismissed him with a gesture, but the words stayed with her. In medical, the staff worked quickly. Scans showed internal bruising, muscle strain, and mild radiation exposure. Any other species would have required stasis treatment. Elias was cleared within the hour. When he returned to duty, whispers followed him through the corridors. Some crew members looked at him with something close to respect. Others watched him with open fear. Veilrix noticed all of it. The ship limped toward a temporary coalition outpost for repairs. During the journey, Veilrix ordered a deeper review of human combat behavior. She accessed restricted files she had previously ignored. Records of Earth's history filled her display. Wars fought with primitive weapons, conflicts that lasted generations. Cities rebuilt again and again after destruction. Humans surviving plagues, famine, natural disasters, and each other. She felt a tightening sensation in her chest. The bond flickered as Elias passed nearby. She felt his attention shift toward her, not intrusive, just aware. He stopped a respectful distance away. Commander, you are familiar with violence, she said abruptly. Elias considered the statement. Yes, you accept it easily. We don't like it, he replied. But we don't freeze when it shows up. That answer unsettled her more than 1,000 threats. The vigilance of dawn docked at the outpost. Repairs began immediately. Veilrix was summoned to a secure channel briefing. Elias was ordered to remain within bond range, but silent. The coalition representative appeared as a shifting hologram, their form tall and insect-like. The engagement was unexpected, the representative said. Your ship was outmatched. We adapted, Veilrix replied. With assistance, the representative added, glancing toward Elias. Veilrix stiffened. The human acted beyond expectations. That is the concern, the representative said. Humans are meant to observe, not influence outcomes. Elias said nothing, but the bond transmitted a sharp flicker of irritation. Your next assignment remains unchanged, the representative continued. Proceed to Sector K-19. Increased pirate activity has been reported. Veilrix's eyes narrowed. With respect, my ship requires... This is not a request, the representative interrupted. The coalition requires data. The channel closed. Veilrix stood still for several seconds, then she turned toward Elias. You were correct, she said. They are using us. Elias nodded. Welcome to being expendable. She studied him. You speak as though this is familiar. It is, he replied simply. They departed the outpost before full repairs could be completed. The crew was uneasy. Everyone knew Sector K-19's reputation. Ships vanished there. Signals went silent. Even pirates avoided it unless desperate. As the ship entered the sector, sensors lit up with interference. Communications distorted. Navigation became unreliable. This place feels wrong, one officer muttered. Elias felt it too, not through instruments but instinct. His body tensed, senses sharp. They're close, he said quietly. Veilrix heard him. This time she did not dismiss the warning. Moments later, the attack came, not a direct assault. Boarding pods slammed into the hull, cutting through armor like it was thin metal. Alarms screamed. Internal defense systems failed in multiple sections. Boarders, a crew member shouted. Veilrix drew her sidearm and issued rapid commands. Security teams moved to intercept, but the enemy was faster, stronger. These were not common pirates. Elias felt the bond tighten as Veilrix advanced toward the breach. Stay with the command staff, she ordered. Elias ignored the pain that flared as he followed her instead. The corridor ahead erupted into violence. Alien attackers poured through the breach, towering figures with heavy armor and bladed weapons. Coalition security fell back, overwhelmed. Veilrix fired with precision, dropping one attacker then another, but their numbers kept growing. An attacker lunged toward her, striking her weapon aside. Veilrix stumbled. The bond spiked with danger. Elias moved. He did not charge blindly. He grabbed a fallen weapon, adjusted its grip, and used the narrow corridor to his advantage. He slammed into the attacker's joint plating, forcing it off balance. Another enemy swung at him. Elias ducked low, striking upward with brutal efficiency. The sounds were harsh, bone against metal, breath forced from lungs. Elias took hits that would have dropped others. He kept moving. Veilrix watched through the chaos, disbelief flooding her thoughts. The bond transmitted raw sensation. Pain, yes, but also determination so intense it felt like heat. More attackers advanced. Elias positioned himself between them and Veilrix without thinking. "Human," she shouted, "fall back." "Not happening," he replied. He fought like someone who had accepted injury as a cost, not a failure. He used walls, floors, broken panels. Every movement had purpose. When reinforcements finally arrived, the corridor was littered with unmoving bodies. Elias leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Blood ran freely now, soaking his sleeve. Veilrix stepped toward him, then stopped. Through the bond, she felt something unfamiliar. Fear, not his. Hers medical teams rushed in. Elias was pulled onto a stretcher despite his protests. "I'm fine," he said weakly. "You are not," Veilrix said sharply. As he was carried away, their eyes met. For the first time, there was no distance between them, no command, no asset. Only shared survival. Later, alone in her quarters, Veilrix removed her armor and sat heavily. Her hands trembled slightly. She did not hide it. She replayed the moment when Elias had stepped in front of her without hesitation. The bond had not forced him. There had been no command. He chose to. That realization changed everything. On the medical deck, Elias lay unconscious, his body finally demanding rest. Machines hummed softly around him. Doctors worked carefully, amazed at how much damage he had endured and how stubbornly his body fought to recover. Veilrix stood outside the observation window, watching. The Coalition had bound a human to her as a symbol of control. What they had actually done was place a Deathworld survivor in the middle of a fragile galaxy. And for the first time, Commander Veilrix wondered who was truly in danger now. Elias woke slowly, dragged back to awareness by a dull, aching pain that seemed to live in every part of his body. The ceiling above him was unfamiliar, smooth and pale, lit by soft medical lights. For a moment he did not remember where he was. Then the memories rushed back. The corridor, the attackers, Veilrix falling. He tried to sit up and failed. A sharp pulse ran through his chest, and unseen restraints tightened gently, holding him down. Machines hummed beside him, their rhythm steady and calm. "Easy," a voice said. Elias turned his head. A medical officer stood nearby, their many eyes focused on a display filled with human biological data. "You have been unconscious for 16 standard hours," the officer continued. "Your injuries were severe." Elias swallowed, his throat felt dry. "The ship, operational," the officer replied, "thanks largely to you." Elias closed his eyes briefly. Relief washed through him, followed by exhaustion. Through the bond, faint but present, he sensed Veilrix. She was awake, alert, watching. The restraints loosened slightly. "You are difficult to stabilize," the officer added. "Your species does not respond to injury the way our models predict." Elias gave a weak smile. "Yeah, we get that a lot." When the medical staff finally allowed Veilrix to enter, Elias felt the shift before he saw her. The bond sharpened, awareness flowing between them like a quiet current. She stood at the foot of the bed, armor removed, her presence less imposing but no less intense. Her eyes studied him carefully, as if he were a problem she had not yet solved. "You should not have survived," she said. "People keep saying that," Elias replied. Her gaze did not soften. "You placed yourself between me and the attackers." "Yes, that was not an order." "No, then explain it." Elias considered his answer. "You were my officer." "You were also in danger. Where I come from, that's reason enough." Veilrix felt something tighten in her chest. The bond carried no deception, only simple truth. "You understand that the binding does not require loyalty," she said, "only compliance." "I know," Elias replied. "But loyalty isn't something you can program." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Veilrix turned and left without another word. In the days that followed, the vigilance of Dawn remained in Sector K-19 longer than planned. The attackers had not returned, but that made the crew more nervous, not less. Repairs were ongoing, and patrol routes were adjusted constantly. Elias was confined to light duty. He hated it. He spent his time observing the crew, listening, learning. He noticed how easily they became overwhelmed when plans failed, how hesitation crept in when the situation turned chaotic. Humans had learned long ago that chaos was not the enemy. Panic was. Veilrix watched him closely, though she never admitted it. She noticed how crew members began to seek his presence during tense moments, how his calm steadied them, how his suggestions, when quietly offered, often proved correct. The bond transmitted subtle shifts now, not commands, not resistance, awareness, mutual. One cycle later, Coalition Command transmitted a new directive. An unidentified signal had been detected deep within the sector. Ancient, powerful, dangerous. A relic site, possibly pre-coalition in origin. The Vigilance of Dawn was ordered to investigate. Veilrix read the order twice. This was no longer data collection. This was risk bordering on recklessness. "They are pushing us," she said quietly. Elias stood nearby, arms crossed. "They want to see what breaks first." "Us," Veilrix said. "Or whatever's waiting out there," Elias replied. They approached the coordinates cautiously. Sensors struggled as interference increased. Space itself seemed distorted, bent by forces the Coalition barely understood. At the center of the anomaly floated a massive structure, dark and silent. It did not resemble any known architecture. Its surface was scarred, ancient, yet intact. "This thing predates most known civilizations," an officer whispered. Before Veilrix could issue orders, the structure activated. Energy surged outward, slamming into the Vigilance of Dawn. Systems failed instantly. Power died. Gravity cut out. The ship drifted helplessly. Veilrix fought to regain control, but the structure was pulling them in. "Commander," Elias said, gripping a console as his body floated, "this is a trap." "I am aware," she replied. The ship collided with the structure's surface, locking into place with a heavy impact. Emergency lights flickered on. Then the boarders came, not pirates, not soldiers. Machines. They emerged from the structure's surface, smooth and relentless, moving with perfect coordination. Their weapons were silent and precise. Coalition security barely slowed them. Veilrix drew her weapon and advanced, issuing commands with deadly focus. Elias followed without being told. The machines adapted instantly to standard tactics. Energy weapons lost effectiveness. Defensive formations collapsed. Elias watched, thinking fast. "They're predicting us," he said. "Pattern-based?" Veilrix nodded. "Then how do we fight them?" Elias' jaw tightened. "By being unpredictable." He broke formation deliberately, moving in ways no trained alien soldier would. He used damaged equipment, manual overrides, environmental hazards. He made choices that were inefficient but unexpected. The machines hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Veilrix adjusted her orders instantly, mirroring Elias' chaotic movements. The bond flared as their intentions aligned without words. Crew members followed, abandoning rigid doctrine in favor of raw survival. The corridor became a battlefield of improvisation. Panels ripped free. Gravity flickered on and off. Machines fell one by one, overwhelmed by a species that refused to act logically. Still, the cost was high. A machine struck Veilrix hard, sending her crashing into a bulkhead. Her weapon skidded away. She struggled to rise. Elias saw it happen. He did not hesitate. He charged, ignoring pain, ignoring damage. He tore the machine apart with his bare hands and a broken tool, screaming with effort. Through the bond, Veilrix felt everything. The pain. The fury, the absolute refusal to let her die. When the machine finally fell still, Elias collapsed beside it, gasping. Veilrix knelt next to him, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. The gesture surprised them both. "Why?" she asked quietly. Elias looked up at her, blood on his face, eyes burning. "Because someone has to stand when everything else falls apart." The machines retreated suddenly, pulling back into the structure as quickly as they had emerged. Silence returned. The Vigilance of Dawn was broken but intact. The crew stood stunned, alive only because they had stopped fighting like aliens. Veilrix helped Elias to his feet. From that moment on, she did not order him to stay behind. She walked beside him. Later, as emergency repairs began, Veilrix accessed Coalition archives again. This time, she did not skim. She studied Earth's gravity, its storms, its predators, its history of constant threat. Humans had evolved not for peace, but for endurance. The bond pulsed gently as Elias rested nearby, exhausted but alive. Veilrix made a decision. She would no longer treat him as a bound asset. She would treat him as what he truly was, a survivor from a world that never stopped trying to kill him. And the galaxy was about to learn what that really meant. The Vigilance of Dawn barely escaped the ancient structure. As its damaged engines pushed the ship away, space twisted behind them, the relic falling silent once more as if it had never awakened. The crew did not cheer. They were too tired, too shaken, too aware that they were alive by chance, not design. Emergency systems kept the ship moving, but barely. Hull breaches were sealed with temporary plating. Entire decks were without power. Medical bays overflowed. Elias sat against a bulkhead near the command deck, his head resting back, eyes half closed. His body felt heavy, as if gravity had returned only for him. Every breath hurt. He welcomed the pain. It meant he was still alive. Commander Veilrich stood at the central console, issuing orders in a calm voice that hid how close they had come to total loss. Her armor was scorched. One of her arms moved stiffly. She ignored it. Through the bond, Elias felt something different now. Not authority, not distance. Trust Coalition Command came online less than an hour later. The signal was unstable but clear enough. High-ranking officials filled the holographic display, their expressions sharp with concern and anger. "Report," one demanded. Veilrich spoke evenly. "We encountered an ancient automated defense system, machine entities, highly adaptive. You were instructed to observe, not engage," another official snapped. "We did not have that option," Veilrich replied. "The structure pulled us in and boarded us." Silence followed. Then one of them noticed Elias sitting nearby. "The human interfered again," the official said coldly. "He saved this ship," Veilrich said without hesitation. "Multiple times. That was not his role," Veilrich straightened. "Then your expectations are flawed." The officials exchanged looks. "Commander," one said slowly, "you are becoming compromised." The word struck like a blade. Veilrich did not flinch. "I am becoming informed." The channel cut abruptly. Elias exhaled slowly. "That went well." Veilrich turned toward him. "You speak without fear." "Fear doesn't help," he said. "Planning does." She studied him. "You realize what defying them means?" "I do," Elias replied. "Do you?" Veilrich did not answer immediately. Instead, she issued a private order to engineering, a course change. Not toward the nearest coalition hub, but toward a populated system on the edge of the sector. Elias felt the shift through the bond. "Where are we going?" he asked. "To save lives," Veilrich said. Long-range sensors soon detected multiple distress signals. A civilian evacuation convoy had been ambushed near a dying star. Coalition forces had retreated after heavy losses. Enemy ships surrounded the planet below, not pirates this time. A hostile empire known for overwhelming force and zero negotiation. The Coalition had written the planet off. Veilrich had not. Her officers stared at her in disbelief as she outlined the plan. "We cannot win a fleet engagement," one said. "I know," Veilrich replied. "We are not here to fight a fleet." Elias stepped forward. "We're here to buy time." All eyes turned to him. He continued calmly. "Evac ships need a clear window. We don't need to destroy the enemy. We need to distract them, confuse them, and make them chase us." "That is suicide," an officer said. Elias met their gaze. "It's survival." Veilrich nodded once. "We proceed." The vigilance of dawn entered the system at full burn. Enemy sensors locked on instantly. Weapons fire lit up space. Veilrich maneuvered the damaged ship aggressively, flying in ways that ignored standard safety margins. Elias stood beside her, calling out patterns, predicting enemy movements seconds before they happened. "They expect us to break left," he said. "Don't." Veilrich pushed the ship into a sharp dive toward the star's radiation field. Enemy ships hesitated. "That's it," Elias said. "They don't follow where it hurts." Coalition doctrine would never allow such a move. Human instinct embraced it. The vigilance of dawn danced through chaos, its presence pulling enemy forces away from the evacuation zone. Fighters chased them. Heavy cruisers turned to intercept. Down on the planet, evacuation ships launched. Elias monitored the countdown silently. Enemy fire struck the vigilance of dawn again and again. Systems failed. Hull integrity dropped to dangerous levels. Veilrich felt the damage through the bond as Elias did. Pain, heat, strain. She did not pull away. "They're going to catch us," an officer shouted. Elias stared at the tactical display. "Good." Veilrich looked at him sharply. "If they think they have us," he said, "they'll commit everything." Understanding flashed in her eyes. She transmitted a false power failure signal, letting the ship drift. Enemy vessels closed in. At the last second, Veilrich reignited the engines and plunged the ship straight through a debris field left by an ancient battle. Broken hulls and shattered asteroids tore at pursuing ships. Enemy formations collapsed. Some followed anyway. Elias watched the evacuation timer hit 0. "All civilians clear," he said quietly. Veilrix turned the ship hard, firing everything they had left in a focused burst that crippled one enemy cruiser before retreating at maximum speed. They escaped by a margin so thin it barely existed. When they finally dropped out of combat range, silence filled the bridge. Then the crew erupted, not in cheers, in exhausted laughter, in disbelief, in relief. They had done the impossible. They had defied orders, doctrine, and expectation. They had saved an entire world. Later, as damage control teams worked and medical staff treated the wounded, Veilrix stood alone in her quarters. Her armor lay discarded. She stared at her reflection, seeing someone she barely recognized. The bond pulsed gently. Elias stood outside her door, hesitating. "Enter," she said. He stepped inside slowly. "You okay?" She considered the question. "No," she said honestly, "but I will be." They stood in silence for a moment. "The Coalition will not forgive this," Elias said. "I know," Veilrix replied. "They fear what they cannot control." Elias nodded. "They always do." Veilrix turned toward him fully. "I am releasing several restrictions in the binding." Elias stiffened. "That will put you at risk." "It already has," she said, "but it is the right decision." She adjusted the controls. The bond changed instantly. The pressure eased, the constant correction faded. Elias breathed deeply, surprised by how heavy the restraint had been. "Why?" he asked. "Because you are not a weapon," Veilrix said. "You are a partner." Elias studied her face, searching for deception. He found none. "Then we're both in trouble," he said. "Yes," Veilrix replied calmly, "but we will face it together." Coalition news spread fast. Footage of the vigilance of Dawn's actions leaked. Civilians saved, enemy fleets disrupted by a single damaged patrol ship. And always in the background, humans could be seen, carrying wounded, fighting through fire, refusing to retreat. Across the galaxy, analysts began to ask questions. What kind of species did this? What kind of world produced them? Coalition Command issued new directives. Human involvement was no longer experimental. It was now classified as dangerous. Veilrix watched the updates in silence. Elias stood beside her, arms crossed. "They're starting to understand," he said. "Too late," Veilrix replied. She looked out at the stars, knowing that the galaxy had just witnessed something it could not forget. Humans were not reckless. They were relentless, and once unleashed, they did not stop. The vigilance of Dawn no longer received routine updates from Coalition Command. Messages came late, fragmented, and carefully worded. Veilrix understood what that meant. They were no longer trusted. They were being watched. The ship moved through neutral space, repaired just enough to function. Crew members worked with a new kind of focus now. They spoke openly with Elias. They asked questions. They listened when he answered. Fear had changed into respect. Elias noticed it, but he did not let it change him. He stayed calm, observant. Always aware of where he stood in the room, where the exits were, where danger might come from. The bond between him and Veilrix felt different as well. Lighter, clearer, still present but no longer a leash, more like a shared line of awareness. One cycle later, the message arrived. A full Coalition tribunal. Veilrix stood on the bridge when the summons came through. She read it once, then again. Her posture remained steady, but Elias felt the shift through the bond. "This is it," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied. "They will demand explanations. They won't like them." "No," Veilrix agreed. "They will not." The tribunal took place in high orbit above a central Coalition world. Massive platforms drifted in space, linked by energy corridors. Hundreds of species were represented. Power gathered there like gravity. Veilrix entered the chamber in full uniform. Elias walked beside her, no longer restrained, no longer positioned behind. The simple fact of it caused murmurs to ripple through the crowd. They stood before the council. "You violated direct orders," one counselor said, "multiple times." "Yes," Veilrix replied. "You altered a binding contract without approval." "Yes, you placed Coalition assets at risk to protect non-member civilians." "Yes," silence followed. Then another counselor leaned forward. "Explain why you should not be stripped of command." Veilrix did not hesitate. "Because following your orders would have resulted in greater loss of life and strategic failure." "That is your opinion," the counselor replied. "It is a fact," she said, "and the data supports it." Holographic displays activated around the chamber. Footage played, the relic encounter, the boarding machines, the evacuation, the enemy fleet drawn away, lives saved. The chamber grew quiet, then the attention shifted. "To the human," a counselor said, "step forward." Elias did. You were classified as a low-threat species representative, the counselor continued. Yet your actions suggest otherwise. Elias looked around the chamber. He saw fear, curiosity, calculation. We were never low threat, he said calmly. You just didn't know what you were measuring. A murmur spread. You defied binding limitations, another counselor said. You interfered with command structures. I adapted, Elias replied. Because your systems froze when things went wrong. Your kind relies on violence, a counselor accused. Elias shook his head. We rely on responsibility. Violence is just one tool, not our first choice, but sometimes it's the only one left. The bond pulsed softly as Veilrix listened. You come from a death world, the counselor said. Your instincts are incompatible with galactic stability. Elias met their gaze. Stability doesn't survive reality, adaptation does. Silence again, then a new voice spoke, older. Measured, Commander Veilrix, the council elder said. Do you believe humanity is dangerous? Veilrix answered without pause. Yes, the chamber stirred, and yet you defend them. Yes, explain. Humans are dangerous, Veilrix said, because they endure what breaks others. They do not collapse under loss. They do not wait for permission to survive. They act when systems fail. She gestured toward Elias. You bound one of them to me to control him. Instead, you revealed the truth. Humans do not need control. They need trust. The elder studied her closely. And if we refuse, Veilrix's voice hardened, then you will eventually face them without understanding them, and that will end badly. The council recessed. Elias exhaled slowly. Well, that went honestly. Veilrix glanced at him. You spoke boldly. I learned from you, he said. Hours passed. Then the council returned. Their decision was not what anyone expected. The binding contract will be dissolved, the elder announced, replaced with a voluntary alliance designation. Veilrix's eyes widened slightly. Humanity will be reclassified, the elder continued. Deathworld species, strategic tier, independent command eligibility. The chamber erupted in noise. Elias stood very still. Furthermore, the elder said, Commander Veilrix retains her rank. Her actions, while insubordinate, prevented greater catastrophe. The decision settled like a shockwave. The bond released fully. Elias felt it happen. The final pressure vanished. The quiet presence remained, but only because both of them allowed it. Afterward, on the observation deck overlooking the stars, Elias stood alone for a moment, processing everything. Veilrix joined him. You are free, she said. So are you, he replied. They watched ships move in the distance. So many species. So many fragile systems pretending they were permanent. They feared you, Veilrix said. They still do, Elias replied. Fear just changed shape. What will humanity do now? She asked. Elias thought of Earth, of storms and wars and stubborn hope. We'll help, he said. Until we're pushed too far, Veilrix nodded. And if that happens, Elias looked at her, then the galaxy will learn the rest of the lesson. In the cycles that followed, humans appeared across coalition space, advisors, rescue specialists, frontline problem solvers. They entered chaos without hesitation and left order behind, not because they were perfect, but because they refused to quit. Stories spread. Humans holding evacuation lines alone. Humans walking into radiation zones to retrieve trapped crews. Humans standing between collapsing alliances and refusing to let them fall apart. They were called many things: relentless, unbreakable, dangerous, Deathworld legends. Veilrix commanded joint task forces now. Humans served beside her, not beneath her, and Elias warred. He became something rare, a symbol, not of dominance, of choice. On the day the Vigilance of Dawn was finally retired, Elias stood on its deck one last time. The ship bore scars that would never be fully erased. Veilrix stood beside him. This ship changed everything, she said. It just did its job, Elias replied. No, Veilrix said softly. It carried a truth the galaxy was not ready to face. She turned to him. Would you stand with us again if asked? Elias smiled faintly. I never stopped. They looked out into the stars together. The galaxy was vast, dangerous, uncertain. But now it knew something it could never forget. Humans were not bound, they chose. And when they chose to stand, even the stars took notice.